Much to the lictors' surprise, Paul and Silas refused to leave. Paul declared that two of their most fundamental rights as Roman citizens had been violated. Number one, they had been publicly flogged. Roman law forbids citizens of being humiliated in this way. And two, they had been denied trial. Paul said, "We are not the ones who broke the law here. You are. We're not the criminals here. You are. And now you want to be rid of us quietly?" No. No, if the magistrates want us to leave, you tell them that they must come here personally and ask us nicely, and then publicly escort us from the building. Now the lictors' surprise turned to shock. Roman citizens. Roman citizens! Only the day before, they had publicly flogged two Roman citizens who were innocent in the eyes of the law. Frightened, the lictors rushed to report it to the magistrates. The magistrates were surprised to hear that the prisoners did not want to leave the prison. But they were frightened when they found out why. If these men reported their crime, Rome would have their jobs, if not their heads. It was only pride that kept the magistrates from running to the jail. When they arrived, they practically fell all over themselves trying to apologize to Paul and Silas. Apologize for yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding and their overzealous reaction. The magistrates had no authority to evict these men from the city. But they knew that if they stayed, there would be further trouble. So they asked, they begged, they pleaded with Paul and Silas to leave the city as soon as possible. And then they did escort them from the premises publicly. I've often wondered, why did they do that? Why didn't Paul and Silas make such a public spectacle of their exit from the prison? Could it be that they were actually trying to protect the young church in Philippi, to protect the newborn Christians here? The magistrates had publicly humiliated Paul and Silas, and now Paul and Silas had publicly humiliated them. Perhaps they would think twice before harassing another follower of the way. At any rate, Paul and Silas did leave town, but not right away. Their first priority now was the new church that was meeting in Lydia's home. They spent much of that day praying for and encouraging and fellowshipping with their new brothers and sisters. Then they left. Paul and Silas are my heroes. Because you see, Jesus taught us that we are to love our enemies. Paul and Silas did exactly that. The magistrates, they did not have the right to lock up those men. They did not have the right to beat them, certainly not with severity. And likewise, the jailer was cruel to them, locking their feet in the stocks, forsaking them there, leaving them to fester in their wounds. He used his authority to abuse those under his authority. But then the tables were turned. Paul and Silas had a golden opportunity to avenge themselves on the jailer. They need not attack him. They need not lay a hand on him. They need not do anything. The jailer was preparing to kill himself. If Paul had carried a grudge, he need only to wait another moment of silence and let the jailer do himself in. And what of the magistrates? One word from Paul or Silas, and they would lose their jobs, if not their lives. You see, Paul and Silas saved the jailer's life by their speaking. And they saved the magistrate's life by their silence. And their forgiveness of others inspired others to seek the forgiveness of the God they served. Now, what happened here in Philippi those many years ago was not new. Throughout all of human history, there have been enemies of God's people, fierce and powerful, threatening to destroy us. But the psalmist writes this in response. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one. Let us break their chains, they say, and throw off their fetters. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will proclaim the decree of the Lord. Perhaps you're wondering, how do you know? How do you know this story is indeed true? How do I know? Because I was there. I was there. I was in the jailhouse that night. I felt the violent shaking of the earthquake. I witnessed the prison doors standing open. I inspected the shackles and the chains that had become unfastened. I talked to the prisoners who refused to escape. I listened as Paul and Silas proclaimed the good news of who Jesus is and what he had done for us. And I believed their message that night. And I was baptized by Silas that night. And I had a meal together with the missionaries that night. And when we sat down to that meal, we sat down around our kitchen table. Because you see, that jailer was my father. And neither he nor any of the other members of our family have ever been the same since. My father is gone now. But the legacy of his faith and his love for Jesus lives on in my heart and that of my siblings. And we still gather together to pray and to worship Jesus in Lydia's home every Lord's Day. What about you? What about you? Has God brought an earthquake into your life? Do you know this Jesus? Have your chains and shackles fallen off? Have you turned away from your sin? Has the door of your prison swung open? Have you surrendered your life to the rule and authority of Jesus Christ? Has God demonstrated his divine power in your life? Are you walking in the joy and the freedom of Christ? Has God yet tested your loyalty? Has God tested your allegiance in the fires of persecution? Are you willing to love and follow and serve Jesus, even in the face of ridicule or rejection? Dear friends,